Welcome to today's Learn at Lunchtime program from the State Museum of Pennsylvania. I am Beth Erickson. The topic today is the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, 50 Years and Forward. And with us is Patrick Morrison, the museum's site administrator. Pat holds a bachelor's degree from Millersville University and a master's degree in history, specializing in museum studies from the University of Delaware. His personal interest in railroads was sparked by both his father and grandfather collecting and selling model trains at train meets and flea markets when he was a kid. Prior to becoming site administrator at the Railroad Museum, Pat worked there as a museum educator, devoting his time to developing and conducting education programs for visitors of all ages. He has worked at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania for 29 years. Today's presentation will provide a nostalgic look at the museum's origins, its 50 years of service, highlights of its programs and projects, and prospects for the future using archival and contemporary images. Welcome, Pat, and thank you for presenting today's program.
Thank you for having me.
So it sounds like trains have been an important part of your personal life as well as your career. You share that your interest in railroads was influenced by your father and grandfather. Would you tell us more about that?
Yeah, my father and grandfather both collected and sold model trains. They both had model train layouts in their basements, so I kind of grew up around it. And during college, my first museum experience was 3 summers working at the Altoona Railroaders Memorial Museum, and that's more or less how I got my start here in Strasburg. So they just follow me wherever I go.
That's terrific. Thank you for sharing that. Well, let's get to your presentation to learn more. So while you set up your presentation, let me remind the audience to submit any questions about today's topic in the Q&A, and we will get to as many as we can after the presentation is complete. So Pat, when you are ready,
All right, how does that look?
let's see. Still need to see you. No screen yet.
Okay.
Double check your screen sharing. Oh, it's starting to work. There we go. Just need to go to the other mode and you'll be all set. Perfect.
All right, we're all set?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pat, and thank you for joining us for the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, 50 years and forward. I have worked here for nearly 30 years. In April, it'll be 30 years, 30 of those 50 years, with nearly 9 years as site administrator. Our 50th anniversary logo, which is on the right-hand side of the screen, was designed by my oldest child, Trevor Morrison, and it represents the Art Deco stylings and pinstriping of Pennsylvania Railroad GG1 number 4935, a sleek electric passenger locomotive exhibited in Rolling Stock Hall. Well, rising from the rolling hills and lush farmlands of Lancaster County is a sprawling complex of exhibit buildings, train tracks, and historic equipment. Together, they tell the story of how railroads changed the lives of people for more than 2 centuries. For 50 years now, the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania has preserved and interpreted the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's rich railroad history. That is our mission. We're one of 14 historic sites and museums fully administered by the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission as part of the Pennsylvania Trails of History, with active support of the nonprofit Friends of the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. Coincidentally, we're number 8 on this map of the state, along with nearby railroad-related attractions like the Strasburg Railroad, the Choo Choo Barn, and coincidentally, that's my brother Seth and I in this photo, the National Toy Train Museum, and the Red Caboose Motel and Restaurant at Paradise Station, the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania has helped to firmly cement Strasburg, PA as a railroad-themed destination for travelers across the country and around the globe. As an overview, the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, at the time it was built, was the largest building in North America built specifically as a railroad museum, with 100,000 square feet of indoor exhibit space and 45,000 additional square footage of outdoor exhibit space. We are the nation's first state-owned railroad museum when it was built, and Pennsylvania's most attended state-owned museum. We feature more than 100 locomotives and railroad cars and 250,000 smaller railroad artifacts, archival materials, photographs, and works of art. Today, though, the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania is best known for its world-class collection of approximately 100 locomotives and rail cars. This collection alone spans the early 19th century through the late 20th century. But our museum is so much more than that, so let's explore how it got all started. The late 1950s and early 1960s was really an interesting time for American railroads, and it is really the backdrop for the creation of our museum. The Pennsylvania Railroad and other Class I railroads faced tough times after World War II. During the 1950s and 1960s, the federal government heavily subsidized the development of modern airport and highway infrastructure. Railroads, on the other hand, did not receive equivalent federal funding, and they faced burdensome regulations on top of it all. This disparity was a key factor in the decline of passenger rail and the rise of automobile and air travel dominance in the United States. Passenger and freight traffic declined, and many railroads even went bankrupt during this time. By 1960, most Class I railroads had abandoned steam locomotives in regular revenue service, fully committing themselves to diesel-electric and electric motive power. Grassroots efforts for preservation were ramping up to scramble to save what they could. It is in this context the idea for a state-owned museum devoted to the history of railroading in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania was conceived. In a broader effort to preserve the state's vanishing industrial history, James B. Stevenson, chairman of the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, pitched the idea of a state railroad museum to Dr. Sylvester K. Stevens, executive director of the PHMC, and William N. Richards, bureau director, Bureau of Historic Sites and Museums, PHMC. This talk was concurrent with the creation of a lumber museum, an anthracite coal museum complex, an agricultural museum, an iron furnace museum, and a historic site at Drake's Oil Well. With the support of then-Governor William W. Scranton, under the authority of Act 451 of 1963, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania resolved to establish a state railroad museum of railroad history. Two years later, a special committee voted to establish the new museum in Strasburg, Lancaster County, over other historic railroad towns like Mount Union, Altoona, as well as places like Holmesdale and Scranton. Strasburg received 4 votes, Mount Union received 3 votes, Altoona received 1 vote. This choice would be challenged by Altoona during a subsequent vote of PHMC later that year. The commissioners voted 7-1 to uphold the decision to locate the new museum in Strasburg. But it was still controversial. Let's face it, the site of the future museum was not exactly a historic property. It was a cornfield. However, the decision would prove both forward-thinking and strategic. The new museum would be located across the street from the historic Strasburg Railroad, a very successful tourist railroad located in prime Lancaster County Amish country, already a booming tourism hotspot. In 1966, the state legislature set aside $980,000 to begin planning and to acquire collections. Pittsburgh-based architects Stotts, Hess, and McLaughlin were hired to design the new building. Originally to be called the Pennsylvania Museum of Rail Transportation, as they considered other forms of transportation at the time, like trolleys. In 1967, though, the name was shortened to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. Property was purchased in 1967 and again in 1968. And track laying began in 1969. Our 100-foot-long 1928 Reading Company turntable was donated in 1967 by the Loria Brothers scrap firm and delivered to Strasburg on 3 flat cars and a gondola. And it was installed in the grounds in 1970. Plans for the new museum were finally approved in 1971. And note here that they still call it the Pennsylvania Museum of Rail Transportation on the drawings and the concepts. Name confusion has plagued us for decades. Ground was broken in 1972. Construction took place between 1972 and 1974. As construction commenced, a preview exhibit featuring items acquired for the future museum was opened on April 9th, 1972 at the William Penn Memorial Museum, of course, now the State Museum of Pennsylvania in Harrisburg. One of the featured objects was this live steam train model built by Daniel Cox, grandson of early locomotive builder Richard Norris of Philadelphia. This model is currently on display in the mezzanine of our main lobby. The Railroad Museum although construction was completed in 1974, it was almost a year before Governor Shapp ordered the doors to be opened, all with just a day's notice. The Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania officially opened its doors for the very first time at 11 a.m. on April 22nd, 1975. But a formal grand opening ceremony was delayed until September 10th to allow for Governor Milton J. Shapp and other officials to attend. So let's back up a minute and talk about the collection. Even before we had a building to house them, several locomotives and railroad cars were acquired by the Commonwealth by the mid to late 1960s. Historic railroad equipment was becoming available, and there was a mad dash to get it first. Our first locomotive purchase was this 2-truck Heisler logging locomotive in June of 1965. Our first locomotive donation was Norfolk and Western Railway number 757, a 284 Berkshire-type steam locomotive, which wasn't even supposed to come here originally. Fortunately, in 2019, it finally found its way home to Bellevue, Ohio, at the Mad River and Nickel Plate Railroad Museum in the heart of the Nickel Plate's prime operating territory. Soon we acquired other pieces, including this 3-truck Shea locomotive, this Virginia and Truckee Tahoe steam locomotive, Reading number 1251, and our PP&L Fireless steam locomotive, among others. But it was the arrival of nearly 24 retired locomotives and railroad cars preserved by the Pennsylvania Railroad that helped build the most excitement for the future museum. The first train of locomotives arrived in August 1969, followed by the second train in October 1969. Here that train is rolling past 3 Mile Island, which at the time was partially operational yet still under construction. This equipment was stored on the grounds of the Strasburg Railroad until tracks were laid on the property of the future museum. So why is this collection so important? Well, between the late 1930s and 50s, the Pennsylvania Railroad smartly set aside notable examples of motive power and freight and passenger equipment from across its corporate history for exhibition at various World's Fairs and other public events. Most notably, these pieces were spared the scrapper's torch as they were gathered and restored for the 1939 and 40 New York's World's Fair, in particular the 1940 season of the World's Fair. And in many cases, the way they are displayed in Rolling Stock Hall is similar to the way that you see them here. And many of these pieces were also on display at the 1948 and 49 Chicago Railroad Fair, including the star of the Pennsylvania Railroad in that particular fair was 7002, which was billed as the world's fastest locomotive. For a speed record it set in 1905 of 127.1 miles an hour. Now, the quick story is this isn't the original 7002. They wanted to take it to the 1939 and 40 New York World's Fair, but it no longer existed. It had been scrapped in 1934. So they took another locomotive, 8063, backdated it, and dressed it up as 7002. And it may have just made a brief appearance at the 39 and 40 World's Fair at the very end, but its real star attraction was the 1949 Chicago Railroad Fair. After the fairs, many of these historic Pennsylvania Railroad locomotives and railroad cars were initially scrolled away in several company roundhouses and shops at East Trenton and Kearny, New Jersey, and Wilmington, Delaware, before joining the rest of the Pennsylvania Railroad's relic collection in a roundhouse in Northumberland, Pennsylvania by 1954. And from time to time, a few noteworthy pieces were made available for the occasional public event, or simply brought outdoors for makeshift photo shoots. However, as the roundhouse itself began to fall into disrepair and neglect, so too did this collection, much to the dismay of enthusiasts and historians. To make matters worse, several pieces of this collection were given to other groups during this time, including Pennsylvania Railroad I-1 Decapod number 4483, the Reuben Wells that you see here in this image, and the narrow gauge Waynesburg and Washington Mogul number 4 steam locomotive. Several pieces were also placed on loan to the Strasburg Railroad during this time, including Pennsylvania Railroad 440 steam locomotive number 1223, 3 historic 1890s Pennsylvania Railroad wooden coaches, and the 1855 Cumberland Valley combine car. Fortunately, these pieces would later join our collection. Fortunately, the rest of this unique and historic railroad equipment was finally moved to its new home in Strasburg, Pennsylvania in 1969, at first as a loan to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In the late 1970s, state advocates working to convince the Penn Central to donate the Pennsylvania Railroad Historical Collection to the Commonwealth outright fought off several efforts to break up this collection and send it elsewhere by those looking to resolve the railroad's back debts. In 1978, to further protect this collection, the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission succeeded in getting 27 pieces listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Finally, after considerable lobbying and advocacy efforts, in the waning hours of the legislative session on December 31st, 1979, House Bill number 1997 was signed into law, and the Pennsylvania Railroad Historical Collection officially became state property. During this time and since, the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania gradually added other locomotives and railroad cars to this core collection, representing other railroads and manufacturers that served the Commonwealth. Here is Western Maryland Railway business car arriving in 1974. Pennsylvania Railroad E7 diesel locomotive number 5901 arriving in 1976. And the Pullman Lotus Club car arriving in 1981. The museum also began assembling an impressive collection of smaller artifacts like uniforms, signals, telegraphy equipment, tools, lanterns, office furniture, artwork, dining car china and silver, scale models, and archival materials, including items from the Penn Central auctions in 1972 and the smaller dining car auction in 1973. By opening day in 1975, the museum had a roster of 35 locomotives and railroad cars. By the dawn of the 21st century, the museum's roster had increased in size to just over 100 locomotives and railroad cars. The museum's most recent addition in October of 2023 is now our oldest locomotive, the Philadelphia and Reading Railway Number 1 rocket steam locomotive, built in 1838. The museum's most modern locomotive is Amtrak AEM-7 electric passenger locomotive number 915, which joined the collection in 2015. Between these two acquisitions are 150 years of railroad history, yet that story continues to unfold. Since its inception, our museum has also grown organizationally in size and scope to better tell this story. In 1983, the nonprofit Friends of the Railroad Museum was formed to provide preservation, programming, and fundraising support to the museum. On January 22nd, 1983, our working 8-foot Seth Thomas clock was dedicated during the FRM in its first public event, which also used the clock as its first logo. The clock was once a prominent feature on the exterior of Philadelphia's Broad Street station, faithfully marking the hours from its opening in 1881 until its very last day of operation on April 27th, 1952. It was donated to the museum in 1982. With the FRM's help, the museum initiated a comprehensive stabilization and restoration program for its locomotives and railroad cars, many of which had been stored outdoors. Homer's Hobos was the name for our first restoration crew started by the Friends of the Railroad Museum. And the John Bull replica was restored to operation in 1983, and it was later featured at Expo 86, which was the World's Fair in 1986, in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, the largest gathering of steam locomotives since the 1948-49 Chicago Railroad Fair. The John Bull was restored again in the 1990s for the grand opening of the new addition to Rolling Stock Hall in 1995, and later for Rail Fair 99 at the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento, California. In 1985, the museum also announced its intention to double its indoor exhibit space to shelter more of its locomotives and rolling stock. After a master planning process, a successful capital fund drive was launched to fund a 45,000 square foot addition. And these are just some early concepts for that addition, as well as long-range plans for further expansions of services on our property. Completed in 1995, this addition resembled the grand train shed of an urban passenger terminal of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And it allows more of our locomotives and railroad cars to be stored and displayed indoors. Other additions included Steinman Station, a recreated small-town turn-of-the-century passenger depot in 1988. A modern restoration shop, which opened in 1999. And I wanted to show you some of our more recent restoration projects, which includes an ongoing partnership with Thaddeus Stevens College of Technology here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The Stewart Junction Freight Station, which housed our Railway Education Center, was opened in 2000. The 1915 Golden Age of Railroading Street Scene in 2005. A new front entrance and atrium in 2007. Modern climate control in Rolling Stock Hall in 2012. New exhibits in 2021. New exterior interpretive and branding signage in 2024. And of course, we finally broke ground on the construction of our new Roundhouse exhibit building on July 29th, with an estimated completion in early 2027. And this is a more recent photo. And from these aerial photos, you can actually start to see the footprint on the right there of our new building. Our new roundhouse building is modeled after the Reading Company's Cressona, PA roundhouse, the first location of our 1928 turntable. Speaking of which, our turntable itself will also be refurbished as a part of this project. When completed, our roundhouse will display 6 historic Pennsylvania Railroad steam locomotives, including our B6SB, H10S, E6S, K4S, L1S, and our longest steam locomotive, the M1B. And periodically, we will be able to move them out of the building one at a time to work on in our restoration shop. Expansions like the Roundhouse not only protect and display our collection, they also give us another multi-purpose venue to conduct tours and public programs. In the 50 years since its opening day on April 22nd, 1975, the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania has used its renowned collection in concert with its dynamic exhibits, its tours and education programs, and special events. Our new Victory Gardens, and other outdoor enhancements. So what's next? The title of this program is the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania 50 Years and Forward. So where do we go from here? Well, we have a number of things on the docket for the future. We're going to complete the restoration work on the 4 remaining steam locomotives to go inside the roundhouse. 2 of the 6 steam locomotives will be fully restored by the time we open, and we'll have 4 more that are in varying stages of preservation. We also have 2 electrics that we're going to be working on as well. Pennsylvania Railroad 48, GG1 number 4800, and our DD1 electric locomotive as well. And to better protect them, we're hoping to build a pavilion-like structure over 2 tracks, which runs along 741 East, which is the basically the western front of our property, that will protect and preserve and display at least 4 full-size pieces of railroad equipment, part of our Raise the Roof campaign that we're going to be launching very soon. All of our exhibits and programs work together to illustrate the subtle yet profound ways in which railroads have changed our lives. And that mission continues. At just 50 years old, it seems like the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania is just getting warmed up in fulfilling its mission and serving the broader public. So I leave you with this image, a wonderful sunset in our main train yard. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity.
Well, we're not done because we have lots of questions to go over. So thank you for that presentation. Let's start with this first one. What were some of the top companies making the trains that are in the museum?
Well, we have a number of major manufacturers from the Baldwin Locomotive Works. We have some American Locomotive Company, our Alco engines. We have, of course, the Pennsylvania Railroad and its Altoona shops. So we have a number of smaller manufacturers, Lima Locomotive Works, Heisler, Climax, Vulcan, Porter. So we have a number of different smaller manufacturers as well. We interpret not just the railroads themselves, but we also interpret all of these support industries that did everything from making signals to making the track to building the buildings to all of the tools and uniforms and things that were worn by railroaders. So it's not just the big names, but it's also a lot of smaller names too.
What do you believe is the most unique artifact in the Railroad Museum's collection?
Oh boy, we get a lot of those kinds of questions. We have everything from a prosthetic leg that was used, to help the railroad workers who were injured. We have dining car china in silver, which is pretty impressive. Um, I was there when the rocket was delivered to the museum, and that was a pretty cool day for me. It was the first time that I had ever seen a locomotive or rail car as director come into the collection. I had seen them come in before my time in that role, but to see that locomotive leave the Franklin Institute, come into the Railroad Museum, that's a day I'll never forget.
For those who don't know, can you tell us more about that?
Yes, that was a very interesting thing because the locomotive itself was owned by Conrail, and the Franklin Institute was in the process of designing a new exhibit. Unfortunately, the rocket didn't quite fit into that exhibit, so we were offered that locomotive by Conrail, and so they had to remove it from that facility and bring it to our facility, which meant taking it through a window and on putting it onto a flatbed trailer truck and delivering it to Strasbourg. I could do a program on just that move. It was very, very professionally, carefully handled, so as not to damage the artifact, damage the museum that it came from, and damage our museum. But just pushing that locomotive in rolling stock hall, a bunch of us by hand on rollers, was just a thing to behold. But again, it's now our oldest locomotive in the collection, so that was a pretty amazing time.
Well, you just answered the next question, which was what is the oldest train at the museum? So,
Yes,
what
that
year
is
is
now
it from?
officially the oldest,
Okay. What year is it from?
1838.
1838. And you also referenced getting into the museum. So that's another question of how do you move these large locomotives around when you need to change one from one location to another?
Well, most of our locomotives and railroad cars are on rails. The Rocket is not, the John Stevens is not. There are a couple of them that are on platforms that they can be moved on rollers, heavy industrial rollers. But the ones on tracks can be moved by locomotives. So we have our own small locomotive that we can use to move things around. But if it's too heavy and too large for us to move, we're very fortunate that we have a good neighbor in the Strasburg Railroad that we can hire to come over and move things. All of our tracks are connected uh, via switches to the Strasburg Railroad's main line, which is connected to Norfolk Southern and Amtrak. So we are connected to the rest of North America by railroad.
So, what train would you like to have in the collection that you don't?
Um, Certainly any of the pieces of the Pennsylvania Railroad Historical Collection that didn't come to us, I'd like to see here. But I'm also a big modern railroad fan. I'd like to see more Amtrak equipment come here. Certainly an Amfleet coach, because as a kid, my grandfather took me on train trips, and I remember traveling by Amtrak on Amfleet cars. So I'd like to see one of those come here, maybe a Nacella as they were being retired. But we don't have a tremendous amount of room for a huge addition of rolling stock and locomotives. So it has to be pretty special and pretty important for it to come here now.
Well, that lends us to the next question about projects. You mentioned there have been several projects with the museum over the years. Which restoration project are you most proud of?
Well, I think that when we look back at all of the restoration projects that have been completed, 460, the Pennsylvania Railroad E6S steam locomotive that they call the Lindbergh engine. That engine is an impressive restoration, and that kind of sets the bar very high for the other five steam locomotives that will be joining her in the roundhouse. So I think that sets a pretty high bar for sure. And whether they all look just as shiny and wonderful as 460, I'm sure they will. But that sets a pretty high bar for the rest of the steam locomotives for sure. They did such an amazing job on it. So.
Is there a lot of labor involved in maintaining the rail cars and the other objects in the museum?
Yes, if they've been displayed or stored outside, there's certainly a lot more stabilization work that needs to be done, rust reforming, patching, repainting, making repairs as needed. But if it's inside, we do clean them. We do occasionally wax them and polish them to look really nice. So we do the maintenance is ongoing. It's not a once and done thing. But we do have a pretty good collection of equipment that we still have displayed outdoors that we will get to as resources, time, and staffing permits.
So every museum has a go-to person for answers. Who is the Railroad Museum's railroad knowledge expert?
Well, I wouldn't claim to be that person. I have people that I know that I can call upon who have more knowledge about railroads than me. But I will say that we have some really long-serving staff here in terms of preservation knowledge. I would certainly go to Al Martin, our curator too, head of restoration, who his a very strong institutional knowledge and if he doesn't know a question, he will go to others to ask for help. So I have go-to people in the out and about and in the field, whether they're volunteers, members, or fellow staff members. So if I don't know, I can ask them. But the other thing I have, which is a really strong advantage for a museum, is we have a wonderful library and archives, and it's literally 20 feet down the hallway, and I can go to it anytime to look something up or to find images. And it is a world-renowned archival collection that we can turn to at any moment. It's right down the hallway.
That's phenomenal. Is the public available or allowed to visit the archives there?
Yes, you can make an appointment. Once you schedule an appointment to do research, our library and archives volunteers and our archives technician would be glad to assist. And they do a wonderful job. They just do an amazing job of upkeep and cataloging and going through that collection to make sure that it's easily accessible. And you can actually go to our website and you can go to the search engine on our website and you can see what we have. You can enter whatever locomotive or railroad car or railroad that you're interested in, and you'll find some things right away that you can reference. So that's the easiest way to get started, and then make an appointment and come see us.
On average, how many people visit the Railroad Museum each year? Is there a busier time of year than others?
Yes, right now we are just above 90,000 per year, 90 to 95,000. Before COVID, our busiest year was 2001. We had about 160,000 visitors that year, and we were averaging somewhere between 109 and 120,000 visitors. But I still think 90 to 95,000 is a lot of visitors, and we're happy to see them. Busiest time is the summer season, June, July, August. That's usually our pretty busy season. In a couple of weeks, the holidays, we will get another influx. Happy to see them.
So, what is it about the Railroad Museum that makes it such a popular travel stop in Lancaster County?
I still think in many ways we're the best kept secret in Lancaster County. We do a lot of advertising. We do the best we can with that, but I think a lot of people don't still realize that we're here. But because we are near the Strasburg Railroad, the Choo Choo Barn, the Toy Train Museum, and the Red Caboose Motel, we're in this sort of destination tourism location. So people come here to ride the railroad, and then they come and see us across the street. And if you're interested in railroads, there's no better place than Strasburg, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania.
So, if I come and I only have time to see one thing or experience one thing at the Railroad Museum, what is that thing?
I would go into the museum. I would go into Rolling Stock Hall. There is a place where you can actually walk underneath the locomotive and see this massive locomotive above you, or you can go above the bridge and look down and see the whole collection, get a great view of the museum itself. So from there, you can explore what you want to explore, but those are two great ways to see the collection that we have in a very unique way if you don't have a lot of time.
I want to thank the audience for all your questions today. Pat, what would you like the audience to remember from today's presentation?
Well, I think that we have a unique collection, but we're, within this Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, with the various museums and historic sites that are administered by the PHMC, there's a little bit of everything. And if you don't think that railroads have a connection to you, spend just a few minutes here and you would be surprised. You probably do have a railroad connection of some kind. There is something in this museum for everybody, and something that would appeal to all ages, all audiences, and we would be certainly excited to see you all here and hope to hear from you again.
Pat, thank you so much for today's presentation.
My pleasure.
I want to thank the audience for attending today, and we hope that you will join us again for another Learn at Lunchtime program. Visit the State Museum of Pennsylvania's website at statemuseumpa.org for program information and to sign up.